Just a minute here. All right. Welcome back to weekly Dalton Collective Hangout. So today, I just have a couple things I wanted to go over before we get into things. So, so Eric, on the so the legal incorporation stuff, that's still going to be a week or two out, right? And we're still waiting for that to all finalize.
About 5 days, or well, 5 to a week. I looked it up just before the call here, and the estimated delivery is still the 24th through the 27th, and we're still in the name check phase, which is a little shocking to me. I'm hoping that we're not going to have trouble with that, because a name check should be a 1-minute thing with the Department of State. But I understand that in Delaware, they're a little bit like they wanted extra details about why we chose the name we did and what that name means and all sorts of things, which I provided. But I guess maybe in Delaware, they're doing a little bit more of a, not just has that name been taken, but is this a name that we, the state of Delaware, want to register to make sure that it's not something nefarious or nasty or something like that. So we'll see how it goes.
All right. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. And then on the state of the shares, I was wondering if we should copy that with the Dalton $10 that we created a while back.
I think that would be good.
Okay.
The only difference is that those obviously $10 they're individually transferable at will, right? I mean, that's true of our shares too, but the idea is that we would on Scout's honor not transfer the shares so that we don't lose the company.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I mean, they don't necessarily have to be, they can be symbolic. I guess it depends on where do we want the do we want the legal contracts to be the sort of final, or do we want the legal contracts to point to something on chain that's final?
It's a good question. I don't think we have to at first, because right now control is truly in the arms of the shareholders. I don't know how we would arrange the bylaws to point to the on-chain resources, but I suppose what we would actually want to do is we would have like some trusted owners at the top of the corporation who vow, whatever that's worth, to not divest themselves of the stock, and then bind themselves in the operating agreement to the results of the on-chain holdings of Dalton, or of $10 rather. You know what I'm saying?
It's like an oracle.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So you have this like on-chain thing, and then an oracle that looks at it and be like, all right, this is what happened. Okay. Yeah, that's something like that. We might also want to look at other implementations of these types of tokens and get something a bit closer to what we want, or modify them in some way that's not too scary.
Is there a way to make it so that an asset is only transferable on chain via the will of like the multisig? You know what I mean? Like, we give you this, but you can't change it. Okay, well then that's what we should do, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So, but in that case, it would just be, we'd have to add some logic around the transfer function, right? So it would have some state would have to be updated, or something would have to happen in the multisig first before anything else could happen. Or I don't know, maybe we even just do it. I mean, the simplest way is just to leave them in the multisig and not give them to individuals at all.
Yeah, but then how do we record who they belong to? Some external ledger, but that's fun, or that's open to fiddling with.
Yeah. Anyway, we can think about it a bit more, and it might not mean that much, honestly, but we should consider what the ramifications were if we wanted to. Meaning, like, I know that if any of the shares transfer hands or anything like that, it has to go on to an annual report and a bunch of other things, like in terms of how that works.
That's why it's better if we do the on-chain stuff and not actually transfer stock at the corporate level,
Right, because then it's
a pain in the butt.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So also an update. So last Saturday we had a conversation with Dan Connolly about the trust metric, and so I don't think the video is that long, maybe 30 or 40 minutes. I put it up on the Dalten YouTube page as well, and you can kind of see that most of the videos just have our like logo, our sigil, and then the other ones that aren't these sort of weekly hangouts, the old podcasts and things, they'll have just like some sort of screenshot from the video. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, and most of what it is, it's Dan explaining about kind of some of the basic math of it, because Phonics was able to join the meeting, and she was just asking about, is this matrix math that we're doing here, are there floating points? And it turns out there aren't any floating points, which is nice, right? So the actual math of this isn't too bad. She did point out that I think the license is GPL, which she would rather go off of the academic papers and the formulas to implement something in Hoon, as opposed to actually use anything that's GPL, because then it also has to be GPL. I don't have any. I think whatever we do come up with in terms of a trust metric implementation in Hoon should be open source. I know this can be a little controversial about what license to choose, but I think we could get around that if we used just the formulas to implement the kind of functionality that we're looking at here. So that's kind of where we're at. So if Phonics does have a chance to do some stuff, that'd be great. If not, then we can also take some time specifically again to look at what the trust metric is and how it's defined as a pure function, and then make that into Hoon, which may be somewhat straightforward considering that it's functional in the first place. So
yeah, if we have I'm learning more and more about Gall as I'm taking this course led by Tim Luck, and it is all becoming clear to me now. Like I'm starting to get what was actually happening when I was able to hack it together in the past and how it was actually working. In the next week, we're starting to talk about inter-agent communication and like how different Gall agents can talk to each other and how to better set that up, and like when you would use a scribe versus when you would use a subscription. I think if we can figure out the math sufficiently to either have it run as a generator that does the math or even build it in as part of a helper core in the Gall application. Like, I don't know Phonics' fast facility with Gall yet, but I think I can actually contribute something to the development as we get to that level. So I'm excited to do that. Yeah.
One thing I hadn't sort of figured out is if there's a global state of some kind. You know what I'm saying?
In Gall?
Well, that is a question, open question. If there is it shared state or something? Like, if there is shared state between agents in a Gall app, how do they agree on that state?
I think Palvin, you can tell me if this sounds right or not. I think that there's no such thing as like a objective shared state that exists out there, like a cloud application that everything connects to, you know what I mean? But there could be configurations of the actual Gall agent that would selectively subscribe to someone who controlled the state. So if we ran a central application on Dalten, anyone who wanted the Dalten trust metric and to interact with it would be able to subscribe to it, and it would subscribe back to them, and then that information would be shared. However, or perhaps in addition, if people wanted to roll this out on their own thing, so like if the tea room wanted to have their own trust metric about who knows tea really well, they could run theirs, people could subscribe to that, and perhaps individual ships could have multiple subscriptions to different areas.
Yeah, I like that. And keep that in the back of our mind as a design choice.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there would be something that Dalten is running that's different than the thing that everybody else is running.
Right.
So when you set up your Gall app, there might be a generic one that can do multiple metrics, but the first thing you would have to do is say where is that metric living? Like what ship is hosting it? Probably, right?
Exactly.
So in this case, Dalten would have a base application that's receiving information in and storing it, and then sending it back out to anybody that subscribes to it.
And it would just be the same Gall application, just in the state of the Gall application. Like any Gall application can basically subscribe to any other Gall application state and receive back the information that exists in the state.
Yep.
And then do with it what they will. And so like there could be really a fractured variety of these different things, but the one that we would look to is the one where people are subscribing only to the Dalten state and only with the application that we're using. You know, other people could scry it and see what we're doing at any given time, and maybe that's for good or for bad, but that would be how it worked.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah. And so that brings me to the next one. This is just a general topic that I thought would be interesting to just have with the Dalten Collective in general, which is to say, right now where we're at in the life cycle of the network, meaning the Urbit network, it's still fairly manageable, right? You can kind of get your head around what most things are happening. You might not be able to keep up with all the messages that you're subscribed to because there's actually far more channels than I can read, but it's still somewhat tractable, and that's likely not going to be the case into the future, or at least hopefully. And we also are seeing some stuff on the Talon side, with Ethereum specifically, about it being very expensive right now because a lot of activity is happening and prices are very high. And so that is another barrier to entry amongst all of the other barriers that already exist to getting on Urbit. Now, that's not to say that this was a permanent state of affairs. This has happened in the past with Ethereum, and usually it lasts a couple months and then it dies down. Or if there's a particular, application that's driving a lot of this stuff, and then that particular application comes down, then it's not too bad. So Mark says things are actually getting a little bit better right now, and that's good, But I think before this all started, gas prices were something in the order of like 20 or 30 gwei, and at one point they peaked at what I saw was like 300, which is to say that's like $15 or $20 to boot a ship, right? That's more than the ship cost itself, which is kind of crazy. And this is also likely to continue to happen as these boom and bust sort of cycles recur. And I was just wondering what people kind of think, either on this call or in general, about the platform that we're using currently to manage address space, which is the Azimuth smart contract system on Ethereum, versus some other kinds of alternatives. And I'll just put one particular alternative out there and then sort of open it up. But there's a side chain of Ethereum called XDAI. And XDAI was sort of invented to use DAI stablecoin in sort of a more transactional manner. So it can do roughly 40 or 50 transactions a second and usually finalize payments within 5 seconds or so. And I've used it a lot over the last, I think, 2 years or so. I think actually, perhaps if you saw this in action when we were in ETH Denver, right? So it's very fast. It works very well for payments. It's Ethereum compatible in the sense of the same smart contracts will work on both places. The trade-off is that you're trading off decentralization for speed. So this is a proof of authority network that is a select group of people that are actually doing or companies really, that are doing the validation on this. And then there's a bridge to bring value over. And that's basically how it works. So wondering what people think of things like Ethereum sidechains, waiting for Ethereum 2, using some sort of Bitcoin protocol, or growing our own homegrown address space tracker that's sort of internal to our own ecosystem. Sort of a general question.
I want to, we talked about this between the two of us already. You know how I feel around the whole, Ethereum is on fire, we need to go someplace else situation. I wanna respond to a specific thing you said around, your Urbit costs $20, and then it also costs $20 in transaction fees to actually obtain the thing. And yes, it's technically not part of the price of your planet, but it's it's not unreasonable to be well, but it is part of the price of using your planet, in the same way that if you want to update, if you want a piece of land and you want to update an entry in the land registry for that, there's probably fees there too. And like, of course, the ratio is there between the cost of your land and the registry fees are going to be like less extreme. But let me look at chat here. With the number of breaches I've had, I would have spent $500 at $20 TX fees. Well, so the $20 fees here, like, of course, this also depends on the state of the network. But right now, $20 includes like all of the invite accepting transactions, which is like doing the transfer and setting the management proxy and configuring keys, etc., etc. And I'm not trying to be an Ethereum apologist, of course. Like, paying this much for those operations is probably not what the Ethereum developers had in mind originally. But it's, I mean, it's part, like, it's a package deal, you know? So, yeah.
Well, maybe another question though, in terms of like this particular cycle, maybe it doesn't make that much sense to do anything, especially since any kind of move would be likely very traumatic and also hurt adoption, right? So I'm not even really suggesting, I just wanted to have the conversation. But when ETH2 does come out and there's sort of different parts of the network, different shards in which these things can happen, do you think maybe it makes more sense at that point to have something that's, you know, either a bit more sort of within our jurisdiction, meaning if we had a shard of address space on Ethereum where we could put all of the registries and we were the validators for that shard, then we would have some higher level of agency potentially?
Maybe. I don't know much at all about ETH2 and like what it's supposed to be doing. There's enough. Yeah, I mean, as far as agency goes, you do want to, like, the logic's always going to be in the smart contracts, and like whoever validates that, as long as they validate it correctly, it's like, well, the logic's there and everyone can see it. And like your agency, in a sense, is constrained by those, and like that makes the agency controlled by the Galactic Senate because they can change the contracts. One of the, like, this came to mind as you were talking just now, one other possible interim solution you could imagine here is doing a thing where the Galactic Senate upgrades the contracts to allow them to submit transactions on your behalf. And so like you would still sign these as usual, of course, to keep the security of this like real. But you would say, oh, I'm just gonna send, like everyone's gonna send transactions that are galaxies, and like every once an hour, those galaxies like push all of those things, like all those state changes onto the Ethereum contracts, and like catch those fees for you.
Yeah, and I imagine you could even bundle them up together such that you could make you could reduce fees by doing like proxy contracts where multiple things are happening at once, but you're only sending out one transaction to that proxy contract. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing with that is I'm not actually sure how big the general, like, the overhead is on transaction costs, because the fee you pay is based on the amount of computation and data storage that happens during your transaction. And so if you're doing more things in a single transaction, it's going to cost more. And so maybe there's still like some overhead you can shave off by batching. And you'd probably want batching regardless to get these things through faster, but I'm not sure if it'd make a significant cost difference.
That's true. I did attend a presentation on this topic, but I didn't listen carefully enough to remember. Like, I was more interested in the mechanics than I was interested in the benefits. How about that? Yeah. So, but yeah, that's an interesting. That's actually, I think, probably a more fruitful area of discussion, which is to say the Galactic Senate, who has authority over the Azimuth smart contracts, could upgrade them in some way to make this easier for people to onboard by taking the costs either on themselves or some other party, and not creating so much disruption in the current system. So there wouldn't be any need for anybody to do anything. So how, Mark, though, how does the like when I look at Azimuth right now, I think there are like 3 or 4 different modules that can be changed, correct? Like ecliptic, polling, maybe attestations, and one other thing. Is that generally?
Yeah, like so you correctly didn't mention Azimuth itself, which is just data storage, and we can't upgrade that.
Right.
The ecliptic, where most of the logic for interacting with that data lives, we can upgrade. And then the ecliptic also uses a dedicated contract for tallying galaxy votes, which is called polls, and indeed attestations called claims. And those can be like swapped out for new ones if need be. Yeah.
Right. So it's basically probably ecliptic that we'd be talking about, the functionality of that.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
What does an attestation do?
Well, actually, Mark wrote it, so he can.
Well, I can take this if you insist. The claims contract, like the contract's called claims. We call the things you put in there attestations. It basically lets you associate some claim with your Urbit ID. So you could go there with your planet keys and say, hey, I am Rabsef, and this is my Twitter account. My Twitter account is @Rabsef or whatever. And then you put that string in there, and you put some piece of proof in there, which might be a link to a tweet saying that same thing but in reverse, and then that would be recorded on blockchain. And if people look up your Urbit ID, they could see a list of all the claims that you've made and be like, oh, hey, there's a Twitter thing associated with this, so I know where I can DM this guy off of Urbit.
Is this a holdover from like the integrations with Tumblr and stuff that used to exist?
No, this is not a holdover from that. It's like the integrations with Tumblr specifically. That's more of an API key management question, I think.
Okay.
But you could imagine this also for things like way in the past we had Urbit profile files where you could add entries to your homepage that listed these kinds of things like Twitter accounts, Bitcoin addresses, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, this is the cryptographically real version of that.
Okay.
And one thing practically that these are likely to be used for in the near future is the the provider standards organization that just booted recently. So the idea there is that all of the ships in and participating in that will have been attested to by stars. So the star can choose, it just wants itself or it wants 5 other people. It doesn't really matter, but they can use the attestation feature to attest to that, those individuals. So since Dalten is a member of this organization as well, the Dalten, we could do something because I think there's only 5 slots for attestations. So we could do something like where we create an array of pat ps and then hash that and then put the hash on, and then you can provide the array, and then somebody else can check it and see that it matches, something like that.
Yeah, you actually you have, I think, 16 attestations available per ID. Yeah.
Okay,
but I think what you want to do is the problem with claims right now is that the way that it's written is like you specify a protocol name and then you specify a claim proper, and then you input some proof for that also. And like we have zero standards around the quote unquote protocols of what values go into those claims and what values go into those proof fields. But you could imagine like making a proposal for this, for instance, for the specific kind of attestation that we want stars to do here, you input this string into the claim field, and then your proof is going to be like a tightly packed list of the planets involved, and like because it's already strictly associated with your star, with your Urbit ID, like you don't need any more proof than that, and so you can just quote unquote abuse the proof field for that. You can fit a lot of data in there.
So just putting this out there, we're talking about the state of this trust metric application, and obviously there's some issue with not having like a true confirmed state when we have a distributed application like this, right? Like we can subscribe to Dalten, and you could tell somebody else what the current state is, but if Dalten could hash its current trust values, like all of them, into one attestation and then post that on an hourly basis or something as part of that application, maybe not even hourly, maybe weekly or whatever.
That's
so that
cool, man.
Yeah, you could check it and be like, okay, so it hasn't been corrupted by somebody else. You know what I mean?
That's great. I love that.
That's really cool. I like that idea.
Yeah. So at some point, you'd need some sort of like nonce, right? Like a transaction counter. So say at nonce blah blah blah. This is the hash, and you can compute that on your side. Yeah, you could totally. That's exactly what a good claim might be, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And then it's also out there for, like, you could have the algorithm available for somebody to decrypt it and get like trust values and PAT-Ps or something, you know, even outside of the Urbit network, so that you could look at it. I don't know if that'd be super
that
valuable,
might be that would be way too much data.
Yeah.
Yeah, way too much data. Yeah, a hash is fine. Yeah, the actual like encrypted data. Well, you could use a pointer. You can use an IPFS hash, right? And that is a data structure that has, you know, all the data you would want, for sure,
built into it.
Yeah. So you could even encrypt it. So you could do, and there's probably lots of different content addressable schemes that we could use, publicly available. Swarm is another one. Coin, whatever they are doing. IPFS works well because if you don't care, if you're storing your own data and you're just making it available, it works pretty well for that. But if you actually want somebody else to store it, then it gets more tricky.
Oh, I see the problem with my idea. You can't take a hash and turn it back into the original values. You can only take the original values and turn it into a hash and compare it, because...
Yeah, right.
Okay,
but
right.
But if I put up an IPFS hash, that's an address which
that holds
is the
data.
whole data set, which is just a couple, which is a hard drive that Dalten owns somewhere.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But then, you'd have complete access to the state, and you'd get the hashing function for free because you don't have to check it. It's just, as long as the link resolves, then that's all you need.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that would be one way to do it. And it's easy. Like, IPFS is just a binary. You just install it. Oh, cool. Well, fun. Well, that's all I had for sort of agenda items. Is there anything else, either Rapsef or Palfin, you guys wanted to chat about before we turn off the recording?
I got one for you.
Please go.
So we're getting ready to order the Hoon School grad T-shirts for the last season, and it took us a little while to get to this, but we're getting there. Turns out making shirts is a little more expensive than I thought it was. Who knew? But, I think maybe if we wanted to in the future, we could do a small Dalten sponsorship and have and maybe even we could reach out to some of the other groups on Urbit to see if they'd want to throw in $20 or something and get their name at the bottom of the shirt or something. I'll show you guys the design once we finally get it done, but it just occurred to me that we might be able to do that. Also, I still want to donate one of my stars to Dalten so that we can sell the planets and start a revenue stream.
Yeah.
But I've been, and I don't mean to besmirch them here, but I've been seeing some things that maybe people aren't as satisfied as they were in the past with Urbit Live and doing that service for them. So we should just consider how we want to take that resource and then where we want to store it and that sort of thing. Anyway.
Or we could just try to do it ourselves. Like, that seems like a fun project to do too.
Well, yeah, and we were thinking about doing it with the bundled one, like the liquidity marketplace that Sharpen was coming up with, but I guess that's not going as well as he had thought. I don't know what a Merkle chain is. Someday I need to ask my wife's father, who's a mathematician, about that so I can understand it.
Ralph.
Yeah.
Ralph is an amazing, amazing human being. Ralph Merkle, like the guy who like invented that. Yeah.
What are they?
They're like it's so you know how a blockchain is like it's one direction, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the hash pointing to the next one, pointing to the next one. Well, imagine a binary tree of those, right? So that any leaf is a hashed value of all the things that came above it, but they can branch off. So if you stick yourself in any place in the tree, you can validate everything upwards.
But not laterally.
But not, anything that isn't included in the hash.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I understand. I don't really understand how that applies to what he was doing, but whatever.
It's like a different data structure. It's just how to arrange them in a way that all of them are tied together.
Oh, I get it. Now I do understand, because you have the largest grouping here and you can split it. And then anyone who has a split from the split can validate that they have true ownership up the chain.
To the top. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Yeah. Merkle trees.
Yeah. That's cool.
He also did some stuff on the public key cryptography, maybe RSA, maybe. And I think he just in the last 2 years wrote a paper on liquid democracy, which is also very good.
Is he one of those NSA guys who gets into the cryptography organizations and then inserts flaws intentionally so that they can break them later?
I don't think so.
Are you guys down on that conspiracy?
Well, I've seen... Anyway, I've seen some evidence that it's not exactly that they put back doors into it. They just can weaken it sufficiently so that they have enough resources to do something about it.
Right.
And there's some really crazy ways you can do that, which is to say, like in some of these cryptographic functions, they have arbitrary just values. Like they can be anything. They just have to be something, right? And if they appear to be sort of pseudo-random or just whimsical, like happy birthday or something like that, but turns out actually happy birthday gives you slightly more advantage in this particular, like that's the way they kind of do it. It's
a data leak.
Yeah. Well, whether or not it's a data leak or not specifically, but
I mean an information leak from the so like the thing Pontifex, which was this like card cipher that I was one of the first things I built in Hoon. I was reading about it to like figure out how it worked and understand everything about it. And the guy who invented it first thought that it was like a uncrackable cryptography, that it was like sufficiently, I don't know, tight to make sure. But somebody did all the math on it and saw that there's like over time a very slow information leak using this specific thing. And so if you get enough samples of outputs on either side of this cryptography, you can then crack it and determine what the starting conditions were. It's just amazing to me that anyone can do that. I'm so like I thought I was good at math.
I never thought I was good at math. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll see you all next week.
Cool, man.